The smell of dust and diesel hung in the air like a warning. A city folded in on itself, streets narrowed to alleys, houses stacked like fortresses. Fallujah, a name that before 2004 might have sounded like a distant place on a map, became overnight the center of a new kind of war. Brutal, intimate, and mercilessly effective at turning modern military might into confusion and fear. This is the story of urban warfare in Fallujah, how the city's concrete skeleton, its people, and a determined insurgency combined to create one of the most terrifying fights the U.S. Army and Marines faced in Iraq. In the spring of 2004, tensions were already running hot across Iraq. The First Battle of Fallujah began as a furious response to an atrocity, the brutal killing and public mutilation of 4 American contractors. The U.S. military moved in, and the fighting that followed would expose a truth that no map, no satellite photo, and no war game could simulate. Fighting in a city is a fight against the city itself. Narrow streets turned into killing zones. Homes with flat roofs became sniper nests. Sewers and basements offered hiding places and channels for surprise attacks. Concrete walls that shielded civilians also masked fighters. The rules of engagement, the technology, and even the instincts of soldiers trained for open desert battles were suddenly inadequate. Insurgents, many of them local and fiercely familiar with Fallujah's maze, adapted quickly. They used monsoon of small arms fire, ambushes, booby-trapped roads, and the most humiliating of weapons for a mechanized force, the improvised explosive device, or IED. These were not just roadside bombs, they were psychological landmines. An IED could stop a convoy, kill its occupants, and more importantly, steal the sense of safety that soldiers relied on. When every intersection might hold a hidden death, every mile moved becomes an exercise in dread. By November 2004, after months of uneasy quiet and brutal probing, the coalition launched its decisive response, Operation Phantom Fury, the Second Battle of Fallujah. What followed was urban warfare at scale, meticulously planned and executed, but still chaotic in the way only human conflict can be. Thousands of U.S. Marines, Army soldiers, British Special Forces, and Iraqi units moved into a city prepared to be a fortress. The plan was simple on paper. Clear the city block by block, house by house, methodically break the insurgents' hold and push them out. In reality, it was a grinding test of endurance, improvisation, and moral calculus. Imagine standing at the mouth of a street with buildings on either side. 5, 6 stories high, windows broken, balconies hanging off, satellite dishes like wounds on the facades. Every rooftop, every balcony, every window frame could hide an enemy. The approach required new kinds of courage and new kinds of tools. Small units, sometimes as few as a dozen, were assigned to clear a single building. They moved room to room with measured violence. Clear the door, check the hallway. Breach the next door, sweep for booby traps, call for medic if needed. The pace was slow and relentless because speed meant vulnerability. The fighting became a series of micro-battles, a kitchen here, a courtyard there, each with its own geometry of danger. Tactics evolved on the spot. Soldiers learned to cut lines of sight, to use suppressive fire to pin snipers before teams moved, to call in armored vehicles as mobile cover. Drones and helicopters provided overwatch, but their cameras could not always see the threats hidden behind thin walls or under false floors. Engineers became lifelines, trained to find and disarm the deadly creativity of adversaries. Pressure plate triggers, command wires dressed as laundry lines, explosive packed doors. The insurgents exploited every human and structural vulnerability. The sound of a footstep on a stair, the creak of a door, the momentary silhouette in a window. The psychological strain was immense. For soldiers, seeing friends fall in cramped corridors did something no training could fully inoculate against. The enemy fought with a willingness to blend into the surroundings, and with a ferocity born of conviction, desperation, or both. For civilians trapped in their own homes, the line between hiding and being used as human shields blurred. Entire neighborhoods were evacuated, but many stayed, either because they could not leave, because they wanted to protect their property, or because their loyalties lay with one side or another. The result was a landscape of human wreckage, a society besieged, and a military forced to negotiate the moral tension between tactical necessity and the obligation to protect non-combatants. One of the most striking features of Fallujah's urban fight was how it rewrote the technological advantage. The U.S. military had superior air power, armor, night vision, and artillery support. Yet in a city of narrow streets and dense habitations, those advantages were dulled. A tank's fearsome presence could be negated by an IED buried under the road. A helicopter's overhead surveillance could not always reveal a fighter crouched in a cellar. Urban terrain multiplied the small asymmetric tactics insurgents used into strategic effects. The city's geometry was a weapon in itself, and those who knew its angles best held an edge. Stories from the ground reveal how ordinary objects became dangerous. A children's toy left in a stairwell could conceal a pressure trigger. A woven rug could hide a tripwire. Soldiers learned to view quotidian details with suspicion. At the same time, the everyday humanity of Fallujah, families cooking on rooftops, elders bargaining in markets, children chasing one another between ruins, continued in quiet defiance of chaos. That contrast made the battle's moral complexity palpable. The same street where a sniper fired could be the street a woman walked daily to fetch water. Operation Phantom Fury is often remembered for its intensity and its tactical innovations. It cleared Fallujah of a centralized insurgent presence and delivered a dramatic, if temporary, tactical victory. But the victory came at a cost. To property, to civilian life, to the social fabric, and to the soldiers who carried the battle. Entire blocks were reduced to rubble, mosques and schools were damaged, families lost homes and loved ones. For many Iraqis, Fallujah became a symbol of pain and a rallying cry. For American forces, it was an indelible lesson in the limits of firepower and the horrors of close-quarters combat. Beyond the immediate carnage, the battle exposed a strategic paradox. Success in combat does not guarantee political stability. Clearing a city of fighters does not clear the grievances or voids that enabled insurgency to flourish. Reconstruction, reconciliation, and the reestablishment of governance and basic services are as critical and often as difficult as any military victory. When those elements are missing or slow to arrive, the vacuum can breed new insurgencies and cycles of violence. So what did Fallujah teach militaries and policymakers? First, that urban warfare demands specialized training, equipment, and doctrine. The U.S. military adapted. Units practiced close-quarters battle drills, invested in better intelligence and surveillance, and developed more precise munitions and non-lethal options for urban settings. Second, the need for cultural and local knowledge became glaringly apparent. The forces that could best interpret the human landscape, the loyalties, and the social currents were those who listened to and worked with local populations. Third, the ethical complexities of urban operations required stricter attention to rules of engagement, preservation of civilian life, and post-conflict plans for rebuilding. But perhaps the most unsettling lesson is simple. Urban warfare is ugly because it is human. It strips away the distance that allows romanticized notions of war to survive. There's no open field, no clean line between friend and foe. Instead, there are bedrooms used as firing positions, supermarkets turned into booby-trap stores, and cemeteries that hold new graves. The terror is not only in the weapons, but in the proximity, the knowledge that the danger is only a few steps away. Years after the fighting subsided, Fallujah's name remained a lens through which military scholars,
journalists, and ethicists examine the reality of modern combat. It forced a rethinking of doctrine and highlighted a truth all armies eventually confront. Cities are not just terrain, they are ecosystems of people, structures, and histories. When war enters that ecosystem, the consequences ripple far beyond the battlefield. If you ask any veteran who fought there, you'll hear common threads. The claustrophobic hush before breaching a doorway, the flat, mechanical procedure of clearing a room, the sudden rupture of everything familiar by a sniper's crack. You'll also hear the softer memories, the hand of a stranger who offered water, the fragile humor that kept a patrol sane, the grief that never fully left. Those human fragments remind us that Fallujah was not only a military event, it was a human tragedy and a complex lesson. The urban warfare in Fallujah was terrifying because it revealed how the architecture of a city can be weaponized, how asymmetry can outflank technology, and how close-quarters combat transforms soldiers into something more than warriors, into occupants of a different kind of battlefield where every choice has moral weight. It was terrifying for the U.S. Army because it forced a confrontation with uncertainty, with limits, and with the consequences of force used in the heart of civilian life. But it was also a crucible for adaptation, forcing doctrine, training, and empathy to evolve. Today, when militaries prepare for the future, Fallujah is a case study, a stark reminder that urban conflict will remain a defining feature of warfare. The city's streets, its ruined facades, and the stories of the people who lived and fought there continue to echo, a warning and a lesson wrapped into one. War in a city is not a video game map to be cleared. It is a living, breathing place that resists being conquered without cost. Listen to the echoes of those streets, and you'll hear more than gunfire. You'll hear the questions that linger long after the last shell has fallen. Whose city is it when the fighting ends? Who rebuilds the broken homes and the broken lives? And what does victory mean when the very ground beneath you remembers the footsteps of the terrified and the brave?